Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the secret doctrine we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with stanza 10, the history of the fourth race. 38. Thus, 2 by 2, on the 7 zones, the third race gave birth to the fourth race, men. The gods became no gods, became Asura. 39. The first race on every zone was moon-colored, yellow-white. The second, yellow, like gold. The third, red. The fourth, brown, which became black with sin. Footnote. Strictly speaking, it is only from the time of the Atlantean, brown and yellow giant races, that one ought to speak of man, since it was the fourth race only which was the first completely human species, however much larger in size than we are now. In Man, by 2 Kalas, all that is said of the Atlanteans is quite correct. It is chiefly that race which became black with sin, that brought the divine names of the Asuras, the Rakshasas, and the Daityas into disrepute, and passed them on to posterity as the names of fiends. For, as said, the Suras, gods, or Devas, having incarnated in the wise men of Atlantis, the names of Asuras and Rakshasas were given to the Atlanteans, which names, owing to their incessant conflicts with the last remnant of the third race and the sons of Will and Yoga, have led to the later allegories about them in the Puranas. Asura was the genetic appellation of all the Atlanteans who were the enemies of the spiritual heroes of the Aryans, gods. Man, page 97. Which became black with sin. The first 7 human shoots were all of one complexion in the beginning. The next 7, the sub-races, began mixing their colors. And once again, we are going to point out that there are many, many archaic values that are no longer held, right? Now, this is an explanation of some things, but not necessarily a true or correct one. We've talked about that before. Just because it has been written down a long time doesn't make it correct. It is entirely possible that there were different peoples created in different places. Absolutely true. They could be created from different materials. They could be the earth, right? The earth where I'm at is maybe different colored than the earth where you're at. That's an explanation. It could be that we come from different species of animals and have evolved that way. There are many reasons. Most of them probably have more to do with climatic problems than it does with spiritual problems when it comes to affecting your melanin levels, right? It's probably not because you were full of sin that you were born with darker skin. That is one of those archaic values that are no longer valid in any way, shape, or form. And if you hold those values, you're a piece of shit, right? If you believe that melanin makes any difference whatsoever in the value of a human being, you are a piece of shit. Like full on, no stops, no halts, no, wait, what are you saying? If you are making decisions based upon the color of skin, you are a racist. And therefore you are a piece of shit. Back to the text. Hopefully that was clear enough for everyone. Was it clear enough? Let me know in the comments if that was clear enough, because if it wasn't, I can reiterate it. A. To understand this verse 38, it must be read together with the 3 verses of stanza 9. Up to this point of evolution, man belongs to a more metaphysical than physical nature. It is only after the so-called fall that the races began to develop rapidly into a purely human shape. And, in order that he may correctly comprehend the full meaning of the fall, So mystic and transcendental is it in its real significance, the student must be told at once the details which preceded this event, of which event modern theology has formed a pivot on which its most pernicious and absurd dogmas and beliefs are made to turn. I don't necessarily disagree with that, right? The fall is a complete fabrication, right? There was never, oh, you disobeyed God and ate from this tree, and therefore you are condemned to sin and death, right? That is not how it worked. The archaic commentaries explain, as the reader must remember, that of the host of Dionys, whose turn it was to incarnate as the egos of the immortal, but on this plane senseless monads, that some obeyed the law of evolution immediately when they men of the third race became physiologically and physically ready. In example, when they had separated in two sexes. These were those early conscious beings who, now adding conscious knowledge and will to their inherent divine purity, created by Kriya Sakti, the semi-divine man, who became the seed on earth for future adepts. Those, on the other hand, who, jealous of their intellectual freedom, unfettered as it then was by the bonds of matter, said, "We can choose, we have wisdom," see verse 24, and incarnated far later. These had their first karmic punishment prepared for them. They got bodies, physiologically, inferior to their astral models, because their kakayas had belonged to progenitors of an inferior degree in the 7 classes. As to those sons of wisdom who had deferred their incarnation till the 4th race, which was already tainted physiologically with sin and impurity, they produced a terrible cause, the karmic result of which weighs on them to this day. It was produced in themselves, and they became the carriers of that seed of iniquity for eons to come, because the bodies they had to inform had become defiled through their own procrastination. This was the fall of the angels because of their rebellion against karmic law. The fall of man was no fall, for he was irresponsible. All right, so this is a logical fallacy right dead on its face, right? These were divine beings. They had a greater understanding of things. They knew more than we do, right? Now, I don't necessarily disagree with that part of it. What I do disagree with, exactly in the same way that I disagree with the fall, like the tree in the garden and all of that nonsense that we dismissed in Genesis. The thing is that if they were these semi-divine beings and they had a greater understanding and knowledge, then they would not have rebelled against karmic law, because they would have understood what that meant. And because they understood what that meant, they would have done what they were supposed to do, right? And it is a cyclic nature. This is if you fail to believe, it's because you don't believe, right? If you don't just accept on the face of these things, then sometimes you can find contained within the text the things which make it not make sense. And if these were divine beings with a greater understanding of how karmic law worked, then they would have followed the karmic law. They would not have been subject to this whole problem, right? This is the exact same problem with Genesis, right? If God created these people, why did he put the tree next to them? And if he gave them an instruction and said, do not eat from this tree, they didn't have no concept of good and evil. They didn't know that it was evil to eat from the tree, and therefore it was not evil to eat from the tree. They were simple-minded. They got knowledge. Now they have responsibility for themselves, and that's a whole allegory, but it has absolutely nothing to do with eating a tree. It has nothing to, or eating a fruit, right? The fruit is the knowledge, the ability to comprehend, to discern. And if you're trying to say that that is not part of God's plan, well, that's just silly. So what happened was God made the Eden. He put the tree there with the full expectation that the humans would eat it. That is the only thing that makes sense in that whole damn story. And so if it is true, then God intended for them to eat it. right? It is the same thing for this. If these people had the knowledge, which was denied to Adam and Eve, if they had the knowledge of how these things worked and they didn't follow the rules, it is because they weren't supposed to follow the rules. But creation, having been invented in the dualistic system as the prerogative of God alone, the legitimate attribute patented by theology in the name of an infinite deity of their own making, this power had to be regarded as satanic and as a usurpation of divine rights. And again, this is applying something that does not belong there, right? There is nothing equal to God. That includes Satan. And so the whole concept of Satan is not valid, right? There's no demon sitting around whispering to you, do this bad thing, right? Not in direct opposition to an angel sitting on the other shoulder telling you to do this good thing, right? These are concepts inside your mind, and I do believe in these entities, but I believe that you have to go seeking them, that they are doing their thing, but unless you involve yourself in it, right? There are entities aligned with the betterment of humankind and with the detriment of humankind, but our understanding of Satan as Christians is that he is co-equal to God. He fell and is somehow the direct adversary to the Creator, and that just simply doesn't make sense. Again, right? God created this being without the knowledge that he was going to rebel. Well, that's just as silly as the whole book of Exodus, where God had absolutely no idea that these people that he freed would be rebellious, that they would not follow his every explicit command. He was completely dumbfounded by that. The God of all creation, he who made every single star in the entirety of the universe, who made every single atom and puts them exactly where they need to be, he was completely surprised by the fact that people would not just do what he said. Completely dumbfounded. He had no concept whatsoever. Yeah, okay. Thus, the foregoing, in the light of such narrow views, must naturally be considered as a terrible slander on man, created in the image of God, a still more dreadful blasphemy in the face of the dead-letter dogma. Your doctrine, the occultists were already told, makes of man, created out of dust in the likeness of his God, a vehicle of the devil, from the first. Why did you make of your God a devil? Both, moreover, created in your own image, is our reply. The esoteric interpretation of the Bible, however, sufficiently refutes this slanderous invention of theology. The secret doctrine must, someday, become the just karma of the churches, more anti-Christian than the representative assemblies of the most confirmed materialist and atheist. The old doctrine about the true meaning of the fallen angels in its anthropological and evolutionary sense is contained in the Kabbalah and explains the Bible. It is found preeminent in Genesis when the latter is read in the spirit of research for truth with no eye to dogma. See the Bible study. And in no mood of preconception. This is easily proven. In Genesis 6, the sons of God, B'nai Elohim, become enamored with the daughters of men, marry and reveal to their wives the mysteries unlawfully learned by them in heaven, according to Enoch, and this is the fall of the angels. Footnote. In general, the so-called Orthodox Christian conceptions about the fallen angels, or Satan, are as remarkable as they are absurd. About a dozen could be cited, of the most various characters as to detail, and all from the pen of educated lay authors, university graduates of the present quarter of our century. Thus, the author of Earth's Earliest Ages, J.H. Pember, M.A., devotes a thick volume to proving theosophists, spiritualists, metaphysicians, agnostics, mystics, poets, and every contemporary author on Oriental speculations to be devoted servants of the Prince of the Air and irretrievably damned. He describes Satan and his Antichrist in this wise. Satan is the anointed cherub of old, God created Satan, the fairest and wisest of all his creatures in this part of his universe, and made him prince of the world and of the power of the air. He was placed in an Eden, which was both far anterior to the Eden of Genesis, and of an altogether different and more substantial character, resembling the New Jerusalem. Thus, Satan, being perfect in wisdom and beauty, his vast empire is our earth, if not the whole solar system. Certainly no other angelic power of greater or even equal dignity has been revealed to us. This is fucking hilarious. I'm sorry, I tried not to cuss in these, and I did already, so this one's probably just going to be out of the box, but whatever. Satan, being perfect in wisdom and beauty, rebelled against God. That is awesome. That is the best logic ever on the planet. He was perfect in knowledge, perfect in wisdom, and yet rebelled against God. Makes absolute sense. Absolute sense. The mental gymnastics that people will play to keep themselves convinced that they are already right. The Archangel Michael himself is quoted by Jude as preserving towards the Prince of Darkness the respect due to a superior, however wicked he may be, until God has formally commanded his disposition. Then we are informed that Satan was from the moment of his creation surrounded by the insignia of royalty, that he awoke to consciousness to find the air filled with the rejoicing music of those whom God had appointed. Then the devil passes from the royalty to his priestly dignity. Satan was also a priest of the Most High, etc., etc. And now, Antichrist will be Satan incarnate. The pioneers of the coming Apollyon have already appeared. They are the Theosophists, the Occultists, the authors of the perfect way, of Isis unveiled, of the mystery of the ages, and even of the light of Asia. I'm going to add mine in there, a series of unconventional beliefs. The author notes the avowed origin of Theosophy from the descending angels, from the Nephilim, or the angels of the 6th chapter of Genesis, and the giants. He ought to note his own descent from them also, as the present secret doctrine endeavors to show, unless he refuses to belong to the present humanity. I lost my spot. Here we were. All right. But what is, in reality, the Book of Enoch itself, from which the author of Revelation and even St. John of the Fourth Gospel have so profusely quoted. All right, here's the thing about this, right? We're going to stop real quick because this is one of those things. We have dealt with this. We have done the Book of Enoch in its entirety through, and most likely, if any of it is accurate, it is the original Book of Enoch, but there is no reason to believe that it's accurate whatsoever, even though it was quoted, right? There is no reason whatsoever to believe that the Book of Enoch as it stands today is the same Book of Enoch as it was. This is going to set some people off because they are thoroughly convinced that the genealogy of the demons contained within that book is valid fact. But there are many reasons not to believe the Book of Enoch. Many of them we walk through in the exact same way that we walk through the Bible study. So you are definitely welcome to check that out. The Book of Enoch may hold some good information. It may not hold some good information. We do not have a reliable source for that. We definitely do not have any valid source for Enoch. The second book of Enoch, the third book of Enoch, or definitely the fourth book of Enoch. Those are absolutely, definitely beyond the pale, not to be considered as authoritative in anything, right? And I don't say that lightly. There is not many things that I will tell you this is absolutely not an authority. Those three books absolutely are not an authority on anything. The first book, you can make the argument that it was the best understanding that they had, but again, probably not an authority. And I know that stepped on toes. Deal with it. And even St. John of the fourth gospel, and here's how you can tell, right? What do we know about John? We know that John was a zealot. He was so much of a zealot that he got kicked out of Pergamon. He was so much of a zealot that he got kicked slap out of the land of Gog and Magog. He got isolated to an island on pain of death, and he was definitely not embracing that pain of death. St. John of the fourth gospel have so profusely quoted, e.g. verse 8 in chapter 10, about all who have come before Jesus being thieves and robbers. Simply a book of initiation, given out in allegory and cautious phraseology, the program of certain archaic mysteries performed in the inner temples. The author of the Sacred Mysteries among the Mayas and Quiches very justly suggests that the so-called visions of Enoch relate to his, Enoch's, experience at initiation and what he learned in the mysteries, while he very erroneously states his opinion that Enoch had learned them before being converted to Christianity. Yo, that's wild. Furthermore, he believes that this book was written at the beginning of the Christian era, when the customs and religions of the Egyptians fell into decadency. Actually, that's probably not far off. This is hardly possible, since Job quotes in his epistle from the Book of Enoch, verse 14, and therefore, as Archbishop Lawrence, the translator of the Book of Enoch from the Ethiopic version, remarks, it could not have been the production of a writer who lived after, or was even coeval with, the writers of the New Testament, unless, indeed, Jude in the Gospels and all that follows was also a production of the already established church. It was probably not during the Gospels. It was most likely during the time of Ezra in the Second Temple, because that's probably when we got the Pentateuch, right? And if that is when we got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and that is almost certainly the case, it is not beyond extrapolation that one of the people who was mentioned in those 5 books would have been extrapolated upon in the same time period, right? If they were taking the various stories of creation and amalgamating them into the one story of the Jewish people, it absolutely makes sense that at that point in time, they probably invented Enoch, right? Because they were trying to convince people of things. It is not beyond the pale that it was between Ezra and the New Testament that it came to be, right? Now, that's not to say that Ezra necessarily wrote it, but it's probably contemporaneous to him, at least partly. And that is the best, like really, it is the best possible spin to put on these books, right? Was that they came from Enoch. Now, when we read through the Bible, when we did Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy in their entirety, we took it for granted, knowing full well that it was probably not true, but we put into there that it was Moses that wrote it, right? Even though it is almost certain that Moses was a complete extrapolation. He was completely pulled wholesale out. Up until the time of Ezra, nobody even referenced him in anything other than the first 5 books. There's a reason for that. It is one that Christians don't like to hear about, but it's true, right? That's not me making something up. It is literally missing from the text. Was also a production of the already established church, which some critics say is not impossible. It is literally impossible. But we are now concerned with the fallen angels of Enoch rather than with Enoch himself. In Indian esotericism, these angels, asuras, are also denounced as the enemies of the gods, those who oppose sacrificial worship offered to the latter. Then they're probably the good guys. If you are unaware, one of the many things that we found out as we were going through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, was that every single time that there was a blood sacrifice offered, it was a bad thing. Every single time that any blood was spilled, it was a bad thing. The only thing that ever came from offering blood sacrifice was more death and destruction. When the Israelites crossed the Jordan and decided that they were going to go about the business of killing everybody who lived in the area, the very first thing they did was sacrifice a piece of themselves. They cut off a piece of themselves and piled it in a pile that was several feet high, right? It was so high that they started naming the area. After that, the name of the area was Pile of Foreskins. Right? They made this blood sacrifice so that they would be blessed by the one who liked that blood. And because of that, they were able to go out and kill millions of people, like horribly, like chase down women and children and just murder them, kill all the dogs and the chickens and the cats and all of their pets, kill everything in this entire area. And yes, I do very well know the arguments that Christians say. Right, I know that was the land of the giants. Oh, they were partaking in all kinds of things that were not great. No, read that book again. Those people who were living in that land were doing so peacefully. There was no terror in that land until the Israelites showed up. And then there was a whole lot of terror. There was a lot of people having a lot of problems. All because of one group of people who decided for themselves that they were chosen. Awesome stuff. You should definitely check out the Bible study. In Christian theology, they are broadly referred to as the fallen spirits, the heroes of various conflicting and contradictory legends about them, gathered from pagan sources. The Coluber tortuosus, the torturous snake, a qualification said to have originated with the Jews, had quite another meaning before the Roman Church distorted it. Among others, a purely astronomical meaning. The serpent, fallen from on high, Dorsum fluens, was credited with the possession of the keys of the empire of the dead. To that day, when Jesus saw it falling like lightning from heaven, the Roman Catholic interpretation of cadabrat el fulgor, to the contrary, notwithstanding. And it means indeed that even the devils are subject to the Logos, who is wisdom, but who, as the opponent of ignorance, is Satan or Lucifer at the same time. I have a different interpretation for this serpent falling from on high, and if you've been hanging around for any period of time, you're going to know it, but if you don't, I'm going to tell you now. The 12,000-year disaster cycle. It gets put as the single video many times in this group of links because it explains this. That video is me compiling a couple of other people with their theories of how this happened, along with mine about this disaster cycle that happens. Now, my particular hypothesis about how this happens is that there is a emanation from the sun that causes problems on the earth, right? Part of that, the earth rotates 90 degrees due to this electromagnetic disturbance, causes the electromagnetic field to do things that electromagnetics do, and causes great toil and turmoil on the planet. It shakes. It moves like a drunkard. Right? The sky is going to roll back and they won't see the stars and all of these things. But before all of that happens, I believe that there's going to be a sign in the sky. I believe that we are all going to look up one day and we're going to see this sign in the sky and be like, oh, that's what they were talking about. There will not be any doubt. There will not be any hesitation. And many people are going to be mad and they are going to kill a lot of people because this thing is coming because they're mad. That's all true. I believe that this sight that we see in the sky may take the form of a serpent. It may be undulating in the sky. We may see something that resembles a beast with 7 heads streaming towards the earth, and it is moving like a snake. Right? It is passing through the cosmos, and it is doing what it needs to do to get where it needs to go. I believe that that is the dragon, the fiery serpent of old, and it will be making a comeback. All of these things are in my realm of speculation, but taken from various sources. That is explained better in the 12,000 year disaster cycle because that video is dedicated solely to it. And if you were looking for more information on that, that is definitely the place to check it out. Back to the text. This remark refers to divine wisdom falling like lightning on and quickening the intellects of those who fight the devils of ignorance and superstition. Up to the time when wisdom, in the shape of the incarnating spirits of Mahat, descended from on high to animate and call the third race to real conscious life, humanity, if it can be so called in its animal, senseless state, was of course doomed to moral as well as physical death. The angels, fallen into generation, are referred to metaphorically as serpents and dragons of wisdom. On the other hand, regarded in the light of the Logos, the Christian Savior, like Krishna, whether as man or Logos, may be said to have saved those who believed in the secret teachings from eternal death, to have conquered the kingdom of darkness, or hell, as every initiate does. Okay, so first off, no human is the representation of Logos. Logos is quite literally motion, right? It is life, heat, motion, light. That is all Logos. Logos, here's how it is, right? There is the Holy Spirit. Everything is part of the Holy Spirit. Every single atom in existence is the Holy Spirit. In the time before time, when everything was standing exactly still, it was existent. All of existence was, but it was not yet moving. Think of it as a snapshot of the entirety of creation. That was Source. At the point where change begins to happen, the very first instant right before that change is the beginning. Every single instance of time, every single change, every single movement, every single transfer of heat, every single light emitted, all of it, all together is the Logos. It is literally creation in motion. It is the active side of the plasma that we live in, right? Plasma exists in two states. It is inactive and active. Right now, you are completely surrounded by and encapsulated in plasma. That plasma is in an inactive state, unless you're being struck by a lightning bolt or in the middle of a fire, in which point it is in its active state. These things I explained in my book, right? Go ahead and throw the plug in there. A series of unconventional beliefs. We talk about this in the very first chapter. I spend a good bit of time on it, and if you are interested in anything I just said, that's going to be your resource. This, in the human, terrestrial form of the initiates, and also because Logos is Christos, that principle of our inner nature which develops in us into the spiritual ego, the higher self, being formed of the indissoluble union of Buddhi, the sixth, and the spiritual efflorescence of Manas, the fifth principle. I just explained why this is not true, right? Right there, you can make the argument that Christos is the acknowledgement and understanding of these things, but again, no human is the representative in entirety of Logos. It is well beyond the scope of any incorporation at all. And so it is by necessity not the principle of our inner nature developing into the spiritual ego. That is a byproduct of the Logos, but it is not the Logos in itself, right? Like, if I were to take this lighter and light it on fire, right? This flame is the Logos. This is literally change happening right now. The consequence of that change is the heat. The consequence of that change is the light. But the change actually happens prior to either the heat or the light. So the effect of the Logos is the higher self developing, but it is not the higher self developing which creates the Logos. That is an important distinction. All right, now we can get to the footnote on the fifth principle. It is not correct to refer to Christ, as some theosophists do, as the sixth principle in man, buddhi. The latter, per se, is a passive and latent principle, the spiritual vehicle of Atman, inseparable from the manifested universal soul. It is only in union and in conjunction with self-consciousness that buddhi becomes the higher self and the divine, discriminating soul. Christos is the seventh principle, if anything. The Logos is passive wisdom in heaven and conscious, self-active wisdom on earth, we are taught. It is the marriage of heavenly man with the virgin of the world, nature, as described in Pymander, the result of which is their progeny, immortal man. And again, I vehemently disagree with all of that, for reasons that are well explained in my book. It is this which is called in St. John's Revelation the marriage of the Lamb with its bride. That wife is now identified with the Church of Rome, owing to the arbitrary interpretations of her votaries. But they seem to forget that her linen may be fine and white outwardly, like the whitened sepulchre, but that the rottenness she is inwardly filled with is not the righteousness of saints, agreed, but rather the blood of the saints she has slain upon the earth. Thus, the remark made by the great initiate in Luke, one that referred allegorically to the ray of enlightenment and reason, falling like lightning from on high into the hearts and minds of the converts to that old wisdom, religion, then presented in a new form by the wise Galilean adept. Sorry, got the hiccups. Footnote 2. To make it plainer, anyone who reads that passage in Luke will see that the remark follows the report of the 70, who rejoice that even the devils, the spirit of controversy and reasoning, or the opposing power, since Satan means simply adversary or opponent, are subject unto us through thy name. Now, thy name means the name of Christos, or Logos, or the spirit of true divine wisdom, as distinct from the spirit of intellectual or mere materialistic reasoning, the higher self, in short. And when Jesus remarks to this that he has beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven, it is a mere statement of his clairvoyant powers, notifying them that he already knew it, and a reference to the incarnation of the divine ray, the gods or angels, which fall into generation. For not all men, by any means, benefit by that incarnation, and with some the power remains latent and dead during the whole life. Truly, no man knoweth who the Son is, but the Father, and who the Father is, but the Son, as added by Jesus then and there. The Church of Christ less than anyone else. The initiates alone understood the secret meaning of the term Father and the Son. They knew that it referred to spirit and soul on the earth. From the teachings of Christ were occult teachings, which could only be explained at the initiation. They were never intended for the masses, for Jesus forbade the 12 to go to the Gentiles and the Samaritans, and repeated to his disciples that the mysteries of heaven were for them alone, not for the multitudes. The wise Galilean adept was distorted out of recognition, as was his own personality, and made to fit in with one of the most cruel and as the most pernicious of all theological dogmas. But if Western theology alone holds the patent for and copyright of Satan in all the dogmatic horror of that fiction, other nationalities and religions have committed equal errors in their misinterpretation of this tenet, which is one of the most profoundly philosophical and ideal conceptions of ancient thought. For they have both disfigured and hinted at the correct meaning of it in their numerous allegories touching the subject. Nor have the semi-esoteric dogmas of Puranic Hinduism fail to evolve very suggestive symbols and allegories concerning the rebellious and fallen gods. The Puranas teem with them, and we find a direct hint at the truth in the frequent allusions of Parasara, Vishnu Purana, to all those Rudras, Rishis, Asuras, Kamaras, and Munis, having to be born in every age, to reincarnate in every Manvantara. This, esoterically, is equivalent to saying that the flames born of the universal mind, Mahat, owing to the mysterious workings of karmic will and an impulse of evolutionary law, had, as in Pymander, without any gradual transition, landed on this earth, having broken through the 7 circles of fire, or the 7 intermediate worlds, in short. There is an eternal, cyclic law of rebirths, and the series is headed at every new Manvantaric dawn by those who had enjoyed their rest from reincarnations in previous kalpas for incalculable eons, by the highest and earliest Nirvanis. It was the turn of those gods to incarnate in the present Manvantara, hence their presence on earth and the ensuing allegories. Hence, also, the perversion of the original meaning. Footnote 1. So, for instance, in the Puranas, Pulastaya, a Prajapati or son of Brahman, the progenitor of the Rakshasas, and the grandfather of Ravana, the great king of Lanka, see Ramayana, had, in a former birth, a son named Datoli, who is now known as the sage Agastya, says Vishnu Purana. This name of Datali alone has 6 more variants to it, or 7 meanings. He is called, respectively, Datwa, Datali, Datati, Datotri, Datobri, Damhobahi, and Damholi, which 7 variants have each a secret sense and refer in the esoteric comments to various ethnological classifications and also to physiological and anthropological mysteries of the primitive races. For, surely, the Rakshasas are not demons, but simply the primitive and ferocious giants, the Atlanteans, who were scattered on the face of the globe as the 5th race is now. Vasishta is a warrant to this, if his words addressed to Parasara, who attempted a bit of jadoo, sorcery, which he calls sacrifice, for the destruction of the Rakshasas, means anything. For he said, "Let no more of these unoffending spirits' darkness be destroyed." The gods who had fallen into generation, whose mission it was to complete divine man, are found represented later on as demons, evil spirits, and fiends, at feud and war with gods, or the irresponsible agents of the one eternal law. But no conception of such creatures as the devils and the Satan of Christian, Jewish, and Mohammedan religions was ever intended under those 1001 Aryan allegories. Footnote 2. We have a passage from a master's letter which has a direct bearing upon these incarnating angels. Says the letter, "Now there are and there must be failures in the ethereal races of the many classes of Dayan Kohans, or Devas, progressed entities of a previous planetary period, as well as among men. But still, as the failures are too far progressed and spiritualized to be thrown back forcibly from Dayan Kohanship into the vortex of a new primordial evolution through the lower kingdoms, then this happens. Where a new solar system has to be evolved, these Dayan Kohans are born in by an influx ahead of the elementals, entities to be developed into humanity at a future time, and remain as a latent or inactive spiritual force in the aura of the nascent world until the stage of human evolution is reached. Then they become an active force and commingle with the elementals to develop little by little the full type of humanity. That is to say, to develop in and endow man with his self-conscious mind or Monos. The true esoteric view about Satan, the opinion held on this subject by the whole philosophic antiquity, is admirably brought out in an appendix entitled The Secret of Satan to the second edition of Dr. A. Kingsford's Perfect Way. No better and clearer indication of the truth could be offered to the intelligent reader, and it is therefore quoted here at some length. 1. And on the seventh day, seventh creation of the Hindus, footnote 1, when the earth with its planetary chain and man were to appear. Seventh creation of the Hindus. There went forth from the presence of God a mighty angel, full of wrath and consuming, and God gave him the dominion of the outermost sphere. Footnote 2. Our earth and the physical plane of consciousness. 2. Eternity brought forth time. The boundless gave birth to limit, being descended into generation. Footnote 3. When the pure celestial being, Dayan Kohan, and the great Pitras of various classes were commissioned, the one to evolve their image, Kakaya, and make of them physical man, the others to inform and thus endow him with divine intelligence and the comprehension of the mysteries of creation. 4. Among the gods is none like unto him, into whose hands are committed the kingdoms, the power, and the glory of the worlds. 5. Thrones and empires, the dynasties of kings. Footnote 4. The dynasties of the kings, who all regard themselves as the anointed, reigning by the grace of God, whereas in truth they reign by the grace of matter, the great illusion, the deceiver. Nothing happens outside of the will. Thrones and empires, the dynasties of kings, the fall of nations, the birth of churches, the triumph of time. For, as is said in Hermes, Satan is the doorkeeper of the temple of the king. He standeth in Solomon's porch. He holdeth the key to the sanctuary, that no man enter therein, save the anointed, having the arcanum of Hermes. These suggestive and majestic verses had reference with the ancient Egyptians and other civilized peoples of antiquity to the creative and generative light of the Logos, Horus, Brahma, Ahura Mazda, etc., as primeval manifestations of the ever unmanifested principle, e.g., Ein Sof, Parabrahm, or Zorona Akern, boundless time, Kala. But the meaning is now degraded in the Kabbalah. The anointed, who has the secrets and mysteries of Hermes, Buddha, wisdom, and who alone is entrusted with the key to the sanctuary, the womb of nature, in order to fructify it and to call to life and being the whole cosmos, has become, with the Jews, Jehovah, the God of generation, on the lunar mountain, Sinai, the mountain of the moon, Sin. The sanctuary has become the Holy of Holies, and the arcanum has been anthropomorphized and phallicized, and dragged down into matter, indeed. Hence arose the necessity of making of the dragon of wisdom, the serpent of Genesis, of the conscious God who needed a body to clothe him to his too subjective divinity, Satan. But the innumerable incarnations of spirit and the ceaseless pulse and current of desire refer, the first one, to our doctrine of karmic and cyclic rebirths, the second to Eros, not the later god of material physiological love, but to the divine desire in the gods, as well as in all nature, to create and give life to beings. This, the rays of the one dark, because invisible and incomprehensible flame, could achieve only by themselves descending into matter. Therefore, as continued in the appendix. 12. Many names hath God given him, Satan, names of mystery, secret and terrible. 13. the adversary, because matter opposeth spirit, time accuseth even the saints of the Lord. 28, 29, 31. Stand in awe of him, and sin not. Speak his name with trembling. For Satan is the magistrate of the justice of God. Karma. He beareth the balance and the sword. For to him are committed weight, and measure, and number. And again, I'm going to refer you to the science of logic, where we are talking about what actually constitutes weight, measure, and number, and that is an interesting read if you are interested. Compare the last sentence with what the rabbi, who explains the Kabbalah to Prince Al-Chazuri in the book of that name, says. And it will be found that the weight and measure and number are, in Sefer Jezera, the attributes of the Sephiroth, the three Sephrim, or figures, ciphers, covering the whole collective number of 10, and that the Sephiroth are the collective Adam Kadmon, the heavenly man, or the Logos. Thus, Satan and the anointed were identified in ancient thought. Therefore, 33. Satan is the minister of God, lord of the 7 mansions of Hades. The 7, or Saptaloka, of the earth with the Hindus, for Hades, or the limbo of illusion, of which theology makes a region bordering on hell, is simply our globe, the earth, and thus Satan is called, 33, the angel of the manifest worlds. And again, I am going to vehemently disagree. You are not on a prison planet. You are not here as a punishment. This is not some eternal torment. This is not hell in any way, shape, or form. It can resemble that concept if you are living in a victim mentality, right? If you have it in your mind that it's going to be a shitty day, it's going to be a shitty day no matter how many wonderful things happen to you. If you have it in your mind it's going to be a wonderful day, it's going to be a wonderful day no matter how much shit is thrown at you. This is a irrefutable truth. I know circumstance is going to make you doubt that, but it is still true. You are not being punished by being incarnated on this planet. You are here directly at the express will of the Creator. You are here to achieve something. Now, what that something is differs for every single person, but the goal is always light, life, love, growth. Every single time. And if you are acting in accordance with that, you are acting in accordance with the Creator, and you are going to have the life you are intended to live. If you are acting out of accordance with that, you are not acting in accordance with the Creator, and your life is going to resemble hell. But it is still not hell. You have the ability to comply at any point in time. You have the free will to not at any point in time, and you create the manifest world. This is a truth. And I don't say that lightly. That is not something that I say often. It is not something that I stand firm on very much. That is a truth. You are not being punished for being here. That is a direct revelation. I cannot give you that direct revelation. I can only relay it to you. I am relaying it to you. You are not here as a punishment. Nobody is. This is not a punishment. Any punishment is directly related to your mindset. Back to the text. It is Satan, who is the God of our planet and the only God. And again, vehemently disagree with that. If you can, or even conceptually can, put your mind upon it, it is not God. Even limiting God by the term God is limiting God more than God can be limited. Any limit that you place upon the eternal and the infinite makes it finite. It limits it from eternality and limits it from finality, or to finality. By placing any limit upon it, you are limiting God. Any person ever in the entire history of the planet that has been able to put a hand upon is not God. is not even a direct representation of God. They can come trying to represent God, but you're going to get it wrong. And that very well includes me as well, right? I am here doing my utmost to represent the God of creation, he who holds everything to the best of my ability. But there are going to be things that I get wrong. That is an indisputable fact. That's why I don't stand hard on many things. That is why I am very flexible in my beliefs, because even the things that I know in my soul, things that have been directly revealed to me, I still have to maintain that I can be wrong. Satan is not a god. That is an indisputable. That is firm. That is a truth. Is there a spirit of temptation? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it is a direct opposition to God. Here's something that most Christians don't know. There is zero reference to hell in the Old Testament. Not a single one. There is zero references to heaven in the Old Testament. None. Not a single one. There is a reference to the land of the dead, but the land of the dead is neither hell nor heaven at all. That is not a concept that existed in that religion. You got to wrap your mind around that before you think about the second religion being based off of the first religion by saying that they're going to save you from a hell that does not even exist. Satan is not in some burning pit down here waiting for you to mess up so that he can torment you forever. That is not real. And he is definitely not a god. And, by the way, neither are you. Back to the text. The only God, and this without any elusive metaphor to its wickedness and depravity, for he is one with the Logos, the first son, eldest of the gods, in the order of microcosmic divine evolution. Saturn, Satan, astronomically, is the seventh and last in the order of macrocosmic emanation, being the circumference of the kingdom of which Phoebus, the light of wisdom, also the sun, is the center. The Gnostics were right then in calling the Jewish God an angel of matter, or he who breathed conscious life into Adam, and he whose planet was Saturn. 34. And God hath put a girdle about his loins, the rings of Saturn, and the name of the girdle is death. That is an anthropogeny, for absolutely sure. In anthropogeny, this girdle is the human body, with its two lower principles, which three die, while the innermost man is immortal. And now we approach the secret of Satan. 37, 38, 39. Upon Satan only is the shame of generation. He hath lost his virginal estate, he hath the Kumara by incarnating. Uncovering heavenly secrets, he hath entered into bondage. He compasseth with bonds and limits all things. All right, here's another one of those things, right? We just had in this stanza the intimation that generation was not shameful. Why does Satan have the shame? Because you need it to be there. 42, 43, 44. Twain are the armies of God. In heaven the host of Michael, in the abyss, the manifested world, the legions of Satan. These are the unmanifest and the manifest, the free and the bound, in matter, the virginal and the fallen, and both are the ministers of the Father, fulfilling the word divine. Therefore, 55. Holy is the Sabbath of God, blessed and sanctified in the name of the angel of Havas, Satan. 4. The glory of Satan is the shadow of the Lord, God in the manifested world. The throne of Satan is the footstool of Adonai, that footstool being the whole cosmos. When the church, therefore, curses Satan, it curses the cosmic reflection of God. It anathemizes God made manifest in matter or in the objective. It maledicts God, or the ever incomprehensible wisdom, revealing itself as light and shadow, good and evil in nature, in the only manner comprehensible to the limited intellect of man. This is the true philosophical and metaphysical interpretation of Samael, or Satan, the adversary in the Kabbalah, the same tenets and spirit being found in the allegorical interpretations of every other ancient religion. This philosophical view does not interfere, however, with the historical records connected with it. We say historical because allegory and mythical ornamentation around a kernel of tradition in no wise prevent that kernel being a record of real events. Thus, the Kabbalah, repeating the time-honored revelations of the once universal history of our globe and the evolution of its races, has presented it under the legendary form of the various records which have formed the Bible. Its historical foundation is now offered, in however imperfect a form, on these pages from the secret doctrine of the East, and thus the allegorical and symbolical meaning of the serpent of Genesis is found explained by the sons of wisdom, or angels from higher spheres, through all and each, though all and each pertain to the kingdom of Satan or matter. That's gymnastics, revealing to men the mysteries of heaven. Hence, also, all these so-called myths of the Hindu, Grecian, Chaldean, and Jewish pantheons are found to be built on fact and truth. The giants of Genesis are the historical Atlanteans of Lanka and the Greek Titans. And I want to be very clear about this, because somebody made the comment about Atlantis and Lemuria in the last one and did not back it up with any factual information whatsoever. That was my one requirement, right? If you were going to make the comment, state your source. There is no reason to believe, outside of this particular set of books, that the giants were the Atlanteans. The only historical reference that we have at all of Atlantis is Plato, recording from Socrates something that was relayed to him by Solon from a priest of Egypt. We have done Timaeus. It is part of the ancient lore playlist. The direct reference that is there is that the Atlanteans were men, not giants. There is no reference at all in Timaeus to giants. None. Not a single one. There is a reference to Atlas. There is a reference to Atlas's 10 children. None of those are referred to as giants. There is no reason outside of trying to make your doctrine fit with this one record from history to believe that the giants and the Atlanteans were the same. I believe that there were giants. I do. I believe that that evidence has been hidden, that it has been deliberately taken and destroyed. I do. I believe, if not destroyed, hidden very well, probably in some tunnels underneath the Vatican or the Smithsonian, depending on who was doing the hiding. But there is no reason whatsoever to believe that that was the Atlanteans. It could have been, but we don't have any record of that at all. We do have records from various peoples about these giants. We do have that. But we don't have them being a direct reference to Atlantis. That is simply not true at all. Back to the text. Who can forget that Troy was once upon a time proclaimed a myth, and Homer a non-existing personage, while the existence of such, and let's go ahead and take the reference here, right? We are reading through Homer's The Iliad as we speak, right? Literally, that's what I use to catch up and destroy my voice for my therapy every day, right? If I do this for 2 hours and I got an hour left, I read a little bit of The Iliad. One of the books takes about an hour for each one of them. And we're going through the history that is recorded in Troy, right? And if you're interested in that, we are on, I think we're up to 20 now. It might be 19 or something along those lines. We've got several of the books already on record. there are references in there to giants, right? Several of these heroes are referred to as having greater stature than the others. And so, who can forget that Troy was once upon a time proclaimed a myth, and Homer a non-existing personage, while the existence of such cities as Herculaneum and Pompeii was denied and attributed to mere fairy legends. Yet, Schliemann proved that Troy had really existed, and the two cities, though buried for long ages under the Vesuvian lava, have had their resurrection day and live again on the surface of the earth. Now, I am not sure, right? I am fairly positive that we have had some recent excavations that they are saying could possibly be Troy, but I am not positive that that is a certainty in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. So that part is not necessarily true. And again, I can be wrong on that, right? I know that there are some excavations. I know that they are saying that it is possibly Troy. As far as I know, they are not defining it as Troy. But these other two, Herculaneum and Pompeii, I didn't know they were denied as existing, but we have indeed found those. Back to the text. How many more cities and localities called fabulous are on the list of future discoveries? How many more personages regarded as mythical? Footnote 1. See the primeval menus of humanity. Personages regarded as mythical will one day become historical. Those alone can tell who read the decrees of fate in the astral light. As the tenets of the Eastern Doctrine, however, have always been kept secret, and as the reader can hardly hope to be shown the original text unless he becomes an accepted disciple, let the Greek and Latin scholar turn to the original text of Hermetic literature. Let him, for one thing, read carefully the opening pages of Pymander of Hermes Trismegistus. That is part of the Ancient Lore playlist if you would like to know more about that. And then he will see our doctrines corroborated in it, however veiled its text. No, not necessarily. Once again, I have gone through Pymander. As of everything else, from the moist principle, or the great deep father-mother, the first differentiation in the manifested cosmos. First, the universal mind, which the hand of the Christian translator has metamorphosed into the earliest renderings into God, the Father. Then, the heavenly man, footnote 2. The heavenly man, please mark again the word, is the Logos, or the Son, esoterically. The Son, yes. The Logos, no. No, that is not correct. Therefore, once that the title was applied to Christ, declared God and the very God himself, Christian theology had no choice. In order to support its dogma of the personal Trinity, it had to proclaim, as it does, that the Christian Logos is the only true one, and that all the logoi of the other religions were false, and only the masquerading evil principles, Satan. Now, see where this led Western theology to. And again, this is a complete misunderstanding of Logos, trying to fit it into something that you already believe. I am doing the same thing. I will readily admit that my confirmation bias blinds me on this. But much in the same way that once you have seen something, you cannot unsee it. Once you have some knowledge, you cannot unhave it, right? The revelation that was the mystery of Logos, I can't go back to any other interpretation, right? I can't go back to Christianity. I could never join Judaism. I can't be a Mohammedan, right? Those things are impossible to me. I know better. The same thing with Logos. No physical incarnation is literally Logos. Every physical incarnation uses Logos. Now, what do you mean, Pitt? Let's talk about the Trinity, right? We're talking about the personal Trinity. That is the body, the temple of God, by which you navigate 5D space, and which is created wholesale out of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is, quite literally, every single atom in existence. There are two states that it exists in, active and inactive. And then the third part is the soul. That is the deciding point, right? That is you inside of the meat suit. You make the decisions for this. But when you make the decision, you don't make it happen. The Logos does. The mechanics of that is this. You, the deciding factor, says, hey, I want to wiggle my fingers on my temple. And the Logos sends a spark along your nerves to your fingers and causes them to wiggle. You are not the Logos, but the Logos is an intrinsic part of you. It is the part that takes your oxygen and distributes it to your cells. It is the part that changes your food into fuel. It is the part that makes your heart beat. It is the part that keeps you breathing when you're sleeping. That is the Logos. It is not you. It is not an active decision. It is the result of the active decision. And again, that is an important distinction. And again, if you would like more information on that, the only place I know that explains it in that particular way is me, according to me, in this book. It is my speculation. So if you are interested, again, check it out. Back to the text. I lost it. There we go. The heavenly man, which is the great total of that host of angels, which was too pure for the creation of the inferior worlds, or of the men of our globe, which fell nevertheless into matter, by virtue of that same evolution, as the second Logos of the Father. Footnote 3. For the mind, a deity abounding in both sexes, being life and life, brought forth by its word another mind, or workman, which, being God of the fire and the spirit, fashioned and formed 7 other governors, which, in their circles, contain the phenomenal world, and whose disposition is called fate, or destiny. Here it is evident that mind, the primeval universal divine thought, is neither the unknown, unmanifested one, since it abounds in both sexes, is male and female, nor yet the Christian Father, as the latter is a male and not an androgyne. The fact is that the Father, Son, and Man are hopelessly mixed up in the translations of Pymander. And again, right? Father, Son, and Man. This is the spirit, the soul, and the body, right? Man being the body, the Father being the spirit, and the Son being you. Right? The body, man. The spirit, from things, all things are created. The Father, the thing that is created from all things. The Son, that is you. Quite literally, body, soul, and spirit are the driving factor for almost everything. All right, where were we? All right. Synthetically, every creative logos, or the Son who is one with the Father, is the host of the Rectoris Mundi in itself. Even Christian theology makes of these 7 angels of the presence the virtues, or the personified attributes of God, which, being created by him, as the Manus were by Brahma, became archangels. And again, it is going to be a no. I do not doubt that there can be some ruling entity in charge of these things, but it doesn't have to be by necessity. And these vices or these virtues are greatly misunderstood. Once again, I've got a video on that. The 7 facets of God is the video if you're interested, but in that particular Bible study, we went back and looked at what the 7 facets of God actually stand for, right? It was called the 7 faces in the translation, but if you go back and do the word study, you find out that it's not faces, it's facets. Big difference there. These facets are different aspects of God. These 7 virtues are indeed 7 different aspects of God. Love, charity, temperance. Like, there's 7 of them, right? But there's 7 opposites to that that are also attributes of God. The vices are just as much of God as the virtues are. They are quite literally 2 sides of the same coin. Lust and chastity are the exact same thing, taken in excess in opposites, right? You don't have chastity unless you have the exclusion of lust. It is a defining characteristic of each other. There is no separation other than the resistance of lust or the resistance of chastity. You are meant to find the balance between the two. You are not meant to be chaste. It's simply not a thing. You are not meant to be lustful. That is not a thing either. You are meant to find your partner. You are meant to find the person with whom you are meant to do, and to share yourself with them, and them pretty much exclusively, right? There are problems along the way, especially in this day and age. You are not meant to share your soul with everyone. You are not meant to never share your soul with anyone. You are not meant to be completely chaste. It is a balance that you have to strike in your own life, right? It is the same for greed and charity. You are meant to have things, but not to the exclusion of doing good in your life, right? You're not meant to have things simply to have things. It is to have purpose for those things. And yes, recreation is a purpose. You are meant to find balance between the virtues and the vices. Every single one of them. They are all attributes of God. And again, that is an important distinction. And again, that is covered in my book. Back to the text. The Roman Catholic Theodice, itself recognizing in its creative verbum princeps the head of those angels, Caput Angelorum, and the Magni Concilii Angelis, the angel of the Great Council, thus recognizes the identity of Christ and those angels. The gods became no gods. The Sura, Esura, says the text. In example, the gods became fiends, Satan, when read literally. But Satan will now be shown in the teaching of the secret doctrine, allegorized as good and sacrifice, a god of wisdom, under different names. The Kabbalah teaches that pride and presumption, the 2 chief prompters of selfishness and egotism, are the causes that emptied heaven of 1/3 of its divine denizens, mystically, and of 1/3 of the stars, astronomically. In other words, the 2 statements are, the first an allegory, and the second a fact. The former, nevertheless, as shown, is intimately connected with humanity. In their turn, the Rosicrucians, who were well acquainted with the secret meaning of the tradition, kept it to themselves, teaching merely that the whole of creation was due to and a result of that legendary war in heaven brought on by the rebellion of the angels. Footnote 1. The allegory of the fire of Prometheus is another version of the rebellion of the proud Lucifer, who was hurled down to the bottomless pit, or simply unto our earth, to live as man. The Hindu Lucifer, the Mahasura, is also said to have become envious of the Creator's resplendent light, and at the head of inferior asuras, not gods but spirits, to have rebelled against Brahma, for which Siva hurled him down to Patala. But as philosophy goes hand in hand with allegorical fiction in Hindu myths, the devil is made to repent and is afforded the opportunity to progress. He is a sinful man, esoterically, and can by yoga devotion and adeptship reach his status of one with the deity once more. Hercules, the sun god, descends to Hades, the cave of initiation, to deliver the victims from their tortures, etc., etc. The Christian church alone creates eternal torment for the devil and the damned that she has invented. And I'm pretty sure I told you that earlier. brought on by the rebellion of the angels against creative law, or the demiurge. The statement is correct, but the inner meaning is to this day a mystery. To elude further explanation by the difficulty by appealing to divine mystery, or to the sin of prying into its policy, is to say nothing at all. It may prove sufficient to believers in the Pope's infallibility, but will hardly satisfy the philosophical mind. Yet the truth, although known to most of the higher Kabbalists, has never been told by any of their number. One and all, Kabbalist and Symbologist, showed an extraordinary reluctance to confess the primitive meaning of the fall of the angels. In a Christian, such silence is only natural. Neither alchemist nor philosopher could, during the medieval ages, utter that. Footnote 1. Why should, for instance, Eliphas Levi, the very fearless and outspoken Kabbalist, have hesitated to divulge the mystery of the fallen angels, so-called? That he knew the fact and real meaning of the allegory, both in its religious and mystical, as well as in its physiological sense, is proved by his voluminous writings and frequent allusions and hints. Yet Eliphas, after having alluded to it 100 times in his previous works, says in his latest, Histoire de la Magie, page 220, "We protest with all our might against the sovereignty and ubiquity of Satan. We pretend neither to deny nor affirm here the tradition of the fall of the angels. But, if so, then the prince of the angelic rebels can be at best the last and the most powerless among the condemned, now that he is separated from deity, which is the principle of every power." This is hazy and evasive enough, but see what Hargrave Jennings writes in his weird, staccato-like style. "Both St. Michael and St. George are types. They are sainted personages or dignified heroes or powers apotheosized. They are each represented with their appropriate faculties and attributes. These are reproduced and stand multiplied, distinguished by different names in all the mythologies, including the Christian. The idea regarding each is a general one. This idea and representative notion is that of an all-powerful champion, childlike in his virgin innocence, so powerful that this God-filled innocence, the seraphim know most, the cherubim love most, can shatter the world, articulated, so to use the word, in the magic of Lucifer, but condemned. In opposition to the artful constructions, this side life, of the magnificent apostate, the mighty rebel, but yet at the same time the light bringer, the Lucifer, the morning star, the son of the morning, the very highest title out of heaven, for in heaven it cannot be, but out of heaven it is everything. In an apparently incredible side of his character, qualities are of no sex. This archangel, Saint Michael, is the invisible, invincible, sexless, celestial energy. To dignify him by his grand characteristics, the invisible, virgin combatant, clothed, and at the same time armed in the denying mail of the Gnostic refusal to create. This is another myth within myths, a stupendous mystery of mysteries, because it is so impossible and contradictory, unexplainable as the Apocalypse, unrevealable as the Revelation. You should check out Revelation. The Unconventional Revelation is its own playlist. Nevertheless, this unexplainable and unrevealable mystery will now be explained and revealed by the doctrines of the East, or the 12,000-year disaster cycle. But, as the very erudite and still more puzzling author of Phallicism gives it, of course, no initiated mortal would ever understand a real drift of his remarks. No philosopher could, during the medieval ages, utter that which, in the sight of the Orthodox theology, was a terrible blasphemy, for it would have led them directly through the holy office of the Inquisition to stake and rack, which we address in Chapter 8 of my book. But for our modern Kabbalists and freethinkers, the case is different. With the latter, we fear, it is merely human pride, vanity based on a loudly rejected and ineradicable superstition. Since the Church, in her struggle with Manichaeism, invented the devil, and by placing a theological extinguisher on the radiant star god Lucifer, the son of the morning, thus created the most gigantic of all her paradoxes, a black and tenebrous light. The myth has struck its roots too deep in the soil of blind faith to permit, in our age, even those who do not acquiesce in her dogmas and laugh at her horned and cloven-footed Satan, to come out bravely and confess the antiquity of the oldest of all traditions. In a few brief words, it is this, semi-exoterically. The firstborn of the Almighty, Fiat Lux, or the angels of primordial light, were commanded to create. 1/3 of them rebelled and refused, while those who obeyed as Fetahil did failed, most signally. To realize the refusal and failure in their correct physical meaning, one must study and understand Eastern philosophy. One has to be acquainted with the fundamental mystical tenets of the Vedantins, with regard to the utter fallacy of attributing functional activity to the infinite and absolute deity. Esoteric philosophy maintains that during the Santias, the central sun emits creative light, passively, so to say. Causality is latent. It is only during the active periods of being that it gives rise to a stream of ceaseless energy, whose vibrating currents acquire more activity and potency with every rung of the hebdomadic ladder of being which they descend. Hence it becomes comprehensible how the process of creating, or rather of fashioning, the organic universe, with all its units of these 7 kingdoms, necessitated intelligent beings, who became collectively a being or creative God, differentiated already from the one absolute unity. Unrelated as to the latter is to conditioned creation. Footnote. Creation out of pre-existent eternal substance or matter, of course, which substance, according to our teachings, is boundless, ever-existing space. That is in accordance with my definition of the Holy Spirit. Now, the Vatican manuscripts of the Kabbalah, a single copy of which, in Europe, is said to have been in the possession of Count Saint-Germain, contains the most complete exposition of the doctrine, including the peculiar version accepted by the Luciferians. Footnote 2. The Luciferians, the sect of the 4th century, who were alleged to have taught that the soul was a carnal body transmitted to the child by its father, and that other religious and still earlier sect of the 2nd century A.D., the Lucianists, who taught all this and further that the animal soul was not immortal, were philosophizing on the grounds of the real Kabbalistic and occult teachings. The peculiar version accepted by the Luciferians and other Gnostics, and in that parchment the 7 sons of life are given in the order they are found in the Sapta Surya. Only 4 of these, however, are mentioned in the editions of the Kabbalah which are procurable in the public libraries, and that even in a more or less vased phraseology. Nevertheless, even this reduced number is amply sufficient to show an identical origin, as it refers to a quaternary group of Dayan Kohans, and proves the speculation to have had its origin in the secret doctrines of the Arians. That does not prove anything. This guy said that there were 7. And so obviously he is talking about this other thing in which there were 4. Obviously. It's obviously the exact same thing. It can be true, but it is not necessarily proven. right? It is not shown. It is not known. It is a speculation that you have based upon your pre-existing beliefs. We call that confirmation bias. As is well known, the Kabbalah never originated with the Jews, who got their ideas from the Chaldeans and the Egyptians and the Midianites. Thus, even the now exoteric Kabbalistic teachings speak of a central sun and of 3 secondary suns in each solar system, our own included. As shown in that able, though too materialistic work, New Aspects of Life and Religion, which is a synopsis of the views of the Kabbalist in an aspect deeply thought out and assimilated. The central sun was to them, as much as to the Aryans, the center of rest, the center to which all motion was to be ultimately referred. Round this central sun, the first of 3 systemic suns revolved on the polar plane, the second on an equatorial plane, and the third only was our visible sun. These 4 solar bodies were the organs on whose action what man calls the creation, the evolution of life on the planet Earth, depends. The channels through which the influence of these bodies was conveyed to the Earth, they, the Kabbalists, held to be electrical. I agree with that. The radiant, I agree that it is electrical. The radiant energy flowing from the central sun, footnote 1. The central sun of the occultist, which even science is obliged to accept astronomically, for it cannot deny the presence inside real space of a central body in the Milky Way, a point unseen and mysterious, the ever-hidden center of attraction of our sun and system. This sun is viewed differently by the occultist of the East. Yeah, you could say that. While the Western and Jewish Kabbalists, and even some pious modern astronomers, claim that in this sun the Godhead is specially present, referring to it the volitional acts of God, the Eastern initiates maintain that as the supra-divine essence of the unknown absolute is equally in every domain and place. The central sun is simply the center of universal life electricity, the reservoir within which that divine radiance, already differentiated at the beginning of every creation, is focused. Though still in a laya, or neutral condition, it is, nevertheless, the one attracting, as also the ever-emitting, life center. Radiant energy flowing from the central sun called the earth into being as a watery globe, whose tendency, as the nucleus of a planetary body, was to rush to the central sun, within the sphere of whose attraction it had been created. But the radiant energy, similarly electrifying both, withheld the one from the other, and so changed motion towards into motion round the center of attraction, which the revolving planet, Earth, thus sought to reach. In the organic cell, the visible sun found its own proper matrix, and produced through this the animal, while maturing the vegetable kingdom, finally placing man at its head, in whom, through the animating action of that kingdom, it originated the psychic cell. But the man, so placed at the head of the animal kingdom, at the head of the creation, was the animal, the soulless, the perishable man. Hence, man, although apparently its crown, would, by his advent, have marked the close of creation, since creation, culminating in him, would at his death have entered on its decline. This Kabbalistic view is here quoted to show its perfect identity in spirit with the Eastern doctrine. Explain, or complete, the teachings of the 7 suns with the 7 systems of planes of being, of which the suns are the central bodies, and you have 7 angelic planes, whose hosts are gods thereof collectively. They are the head group divided into 4 classes, from the incorporeal down to the semi-corporeal, which classes are directly connected, though in very different ways as regards voluntary connection and functions, with our mankind. They are three, synthesized by the fourth, the first and highest, which is called the central sun in the Kabbalistic doctrine just quoted. This is the great difference between the Semitic and the Aryan cosmogony. One, materializing, humanizes the mystery of nature. The other spiritualizes matter, and its physiology is always made subservient to metaphysics. Thus, though the seventh principle reaches man through all the phases of being, pure as an indiscrete element and an impersonal unity, it passes through, the Kabbalah teaches, from the central spiritual sun and group, the second, the polar sun, which two radiate on man, his Atma. Group 3, the equatorial sun, submit the Buddhi to Atman and the higher attributes of Manas, while Group 4, the spirit of our visible sun, endows him with his Manas and his vehicle, the Kamarupa, or body of passions and desires, the two elements of Ahamkara, which evolve individualized consciousness, the personal ego. Finally, it is the spirit of the earth in its triple unity that builds the physical body, attracting to it the spirits of life and forming his Linga Sarira. Now, as everything proceeds cyclically, the evolution of man, like everything else, the order in which he is generated is described fully in the Eastern teachings, whereas it is only hinted at in the Kabbalah. Says the Book of Dizan with regard to primeval man when first projected by the boneless, the incorporeal creator. First, the breath, then Buddhi, and the shadow sun, the body, were created. But where was the pivot, the middle principle, Manas? Man is doomed when alone the indiscrete, undifferentiated element, and the Vahan, Buddhi, the cause of the causeless, break asunder from manifested life, unless cemented and held together by the middle principle, the vehicle of personal consciousness, of Yiva. Right? This is just an explanation of what I believe, right? The body, the spirit, from which all things are created, the body included, and the manifested life, held together by the middle principle, the vehicle of personal consciousness, the soul. Explains the commentary. In other words, the two higher principles can have no individuality on earth, cannot be man, unless there is the mind, the manas ego, to cognize itself, and the terrestrial false personality, or the body of egotistical desires and personal will. Those are not two different things. To cement the whole, as if around a pivot, which it is, truly, to the physical form of man. Again, this is the mind. The soul, to me, is the mind. The spirit is what we are all formed out of. And so there can be no individuality in the spirit. It is literally everything in existence. There is not really individuality in the body. It is comprised of the exact same elements as everything else. But there is individuality in your soul. You make different decisions than I do. Even if we have the same source material and the same values, we are going to make different decisions at least part of the time. That is individuality. There is only individuality in the individual. All right. The terrestrial false personality, or the body of egotistical desires and personal will, to cement the whole it is the fifth and fourth principles. Footnote. The fourth and the fifth from below, beginning by the physical body. The third and the fourth, if we reckon from Atma. Can't even be consistent with yourself. Manas and Kamarupa, that contain the dual personality, the real immortal ego. Yes, if it assimilates itself to the two higher, and the false and transitory personality, the Maya or astral body, so called, or the animal human soul. There is not two. It is the same soul, right? Your spiritual soul and your earthly soul are quite literally the same soul. You are meant to be tempted by the worldly. It is part of the experience of being here. This is not a prison, but it is most definitely a school. And you have lessons to learn. If there is no trouble, there is no learning. There is a nature that aspires to the higher, and there is a nature that aspires to the lower. Both of those are your nature. Both of those are your soul. You have to have the willpower to overcome the lower and seek the higher. But it is the same soul. There is no differentiation. You do not contain two souls. Back to the text. The two having to be closely blended for purposes of a full terrestrial experience, because they are not two. Incarnate the spiritual monad of a Newton grafted on that of the greatest saint on earth, in a physical body the most perfect you can think of. An example, in a two or even a three-principled body composed of its Statula Sarira, prana, life principle, and linga sarira, and if it lacks its middle and fifth principles, you will have created an idiot. At best, a beautiful, soulless, empty, and unconscious appearance. Cogito ergo sum can find no room in the brain of such a creature, not on this plane, at any rate. There are students, however, who have long ago understood the philosophical meaning underlying the allegory, so tortured and disfigured by the Roman Church, of the fallen angels. The kingdom of spirits and spiritual action, which flows from and is the product of spirit volition, is outside and contrasted with and in contradiction to the kingdom of divine souls and divine action. Footnote. New aspects of life. As said in the text, like produces like, and no more at the genesis of being. And evolution with its limited condition laws come later. The self-existent are called creations, for they appear in the spirit ray, manifested through the potency inherent in its unborn nature, which is beyond time and limited or conditioned space. Terrene products, animate and inanimate, including mankind, are falsely called creation and creatures. They are the development, evolution, of the discrete elements. Again, the heavenly Rupa, Dayan Kohan, creates man in his own form. It is a spiritual ideation consequent on the first differentiation, an awakening of the universal, manifested substance. That form is the ideal shadow of itself, and this is the man of the first race. To express it in still clearer form, limiting the explanation to this earth only, it was the duty of the first differentiated egos, the Church calls them archangels, to imbue primordial matter with the evolutionary impulse and guide its formative powers in the fashioning of its productions. This it is which is referred to in the sentences both in the Eastern and Western tradition. The angels were commanded to create. After the earth had been made ready by the lower and more material powers, and its three kingdoms fairly started on their way to be fruitful and multiply, the higher powers, the archangels or Diones, were compelled by the evolutionary law to descend on earth in order to construct the crown of its evolution, man. Thus, the self-created and the self-existed projected their pale shadows, but group the third, the fire angels, rebelled and refused to join their fellow devas. Hindu esotericism represents them all as yogins, whose piety inspired them to refuse creating, as they desired to remain eternally kumaras, virgin youths. in order to, if possible, anticipate their fellows in progress towards nirvana, the final liberation. But, agreeably to esoteric interpretation, it was a self-sacrifice for the benefit of mankind. The rebels would not create will-less, irresponsible men, as the obedient angels did. Nor could they endow human beings with only the temporary reflections of their own attributes, for even the latter, belonging to another and a so much higher plane of consciousness, would leave man still irresponsible, hence interfere with any possibility of a higher progress. No spiritual and psychic evolution is possible on Earth. Let that sink for a second. No spiritual and psychic evolution is possible on Earth. The lowest and most material plane, for one who on that plane, at all events, is inherently perfect and cannot accumulate either merit or demerit. I guess that's a qualifying qualifier, but man, remaining the pale shadow of the inert, immutable, and motionless perfection, the one negative and passive attribute of the real I am that I am, would have been doomed to pass through life on earth as in a heavy, dreamless sleep, hence a failure on this plane. The beings, or the being, collectively called Elohim, who first, if ever, pronounced the cruel words, "Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever," must have indeed been the elder Baoth, the demiurge of the Nazarenes, filled with rage and envy against his own creature, whose reflection created Ophimorphos. In this case it is but natural, even from the dead letter standpoint, to view Satan, the serpent of Genesis, as the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind. For it is he who was the harbinger of light, bright radiant Lucifer, who opened the eyes of the automaton created by Jehovah, as alleged. And he who was the first to whisper, "In the day ye eat thereof ye shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil," can only be regarded in the light of a Savior, an adversary to Jehovah, the personating spirit. He still remains in esoteric truth the ever-loving messenger, the angel, the seraphim and cherubim, who both knew well and loved still more, and who conferred on us a spiritual instead of physical immortality, the latter a kind of static immortality that would have transformed man into an undying, wandering Jew. As narrated in King's Gnostics, Elder Baoth, whom several sects regarded as the god of Moses, was not a pure spirit. He was ambitious and proud, and rejecting the spiritual light of the middle space offered him by his mother, Sophia Achamoth, he set himself to create a world of his own. Aided by his sons, the 6 planetary genii, he fabricated man, but this one proved a failure. It was a monster, soulless, ignorant, and crawling on all fours on the ground like a material beast. Elder Baoth was forced to implore the help of his spiritual mother. She communicated to him a ray of her divine light, and so animated man and endowed him with a soul. Once again, confirmation bias being fully acknowledged, this leads into what I believe, right? I don't believe in microevolution. I don't believe in macroevolution. I believe in microevolution. Macroevolution being the change between species. The penguin or the amoeba becoming a frog or a fish, and the fish becoming a frog, and the frog becoming a whatever crawled out of the waters, right? I don't believe that happened naturally. I do believe, however, that it is possible through external means. And what is that external means? Solar radiation, in short. I believe, part of the 12,000-year disaster cycle, that there is a eruption from the sun. This is something that does happen. and that as part of this, there was spontaneous mutations of genetic material in an entire species at a time. Right? It doesn't make sense that a singular mutation would lead to a change of species. But if there was something electromagnetic in the sky that caused a genetic mutation across a species, then there is a genetic imperative for the continuation of that mutation. It is the only way in which it makes sense. And this ray of the divine light would indeed be the mechanism by which I believe that it would happen. Now, I don't believe that Eldabaoth or his spiritual mother were physically present in that particular thing. This is an allegory, at best, of what could have happened. Back to the text. And now began the animosity of Eldabaoth towards his own creature. Following the impulse of the divine light, man soared higher and higher in his aspirations. Very soon he began presenting not the image of his creator Eldabaoth, but rather that of the supreme being, the primitive man, Enoia. Then the Demiurgos was filled with rage and envy, and fixing his jealous eye on the abyss of matter, his looks, envenomed with passion, were suddenly reflected as in a mirror. The reflection became animate, and there rose out of the abyss Satan, serpent, Ophiomorphos, the embodiment of envy and cunning. He is the union of all that is most base in matter with the hate, envy, and craft of spiritual intelligence. This is the exoteric rendering of the Gnostics, and the allegory, though a sectarian version, is suggestive and seems true to life. It is the natural deduction from the dead-letter text of chapter 3 of Genesis. Hence, the allegory of Prometheus, who steals the divine fire so as to allow men to proceed consciously on the path of spiritual evolution, thus transforming the most perfect of animals on earth into a potential god, and making him free to take the kingdom of heaven by violence. Hence, also, the curse pronounced by Zeus against Prometheus, and by Jehovah Eldabaoth against his rebellious son Satan. The cold, pure snows of the Caucasian mountains, and the never-dying, singeing fire and flames of the inexhaustible hell. Two poles, yet the same idea, the dual aspect of a refined torture. A Thia Pedusa, the personified emblem of Phosphoros, of the astral fire and light in the anima mundi, that element of which the German materialist philosopher Moleskot said, "On phosphor kein Gedanke." An example, without phosphorus, no thought. Burning in the fierce flames of his terrestrial passions, the conflagration fired by his thought, discerning as it now does good from evil, and yet a slave to the passions of its earthly Adam. Feeling the vulture of doubt and full consciousness gnawing at his heart, a Prometheus indeed, because a conscious, hence a responsible entity. Footnote. The history of Prometheus, karma, and human consciousness is found further on. The curse of life is great, yet how few are those men, outside some Hindu and Sufi mystics, who would exchange all the tortures of conscious life, all the evils of responsible existence, for the unconscious perfection of a passive, objectively, incorporeal being, or even the universal static inertia personified in Brahma during his night's rest. Nobody with any sense would do that. For, to quote from an able article by one, footnote 2, by an Englishman whose erratic genius killed him, the son of a Protestant clergyman, he became a Mohammedan, then a rabid atheist. After meeting with a master, a guru, he became a mystic, then a theosophist who doubted, despaired, threw up white for black magic, went insane and joined the Roman Church. Then, again, turning round, anathemized her, re-became an atheist, and died cursing humanity, knowledge, and God, in whom he had ceased to believe. Furnished with all the esoteric data to write his War in Heaven, he made a semi-political article out of it, mixing Malthus with Satan and Darwin with the astral light. Peace be to his shell. He is a warning to the Kailas who fail. His forgotten tomb may now be seen in the Mussulman burial ground of the Junagadh, Kathiawar, in India. All right, so 4. To quote from an able article by one who, confusing the planes of existence and consciousness, fell a victim to it. Satan, or Lucifer, represents the active, or as Mr. Jules Baissac calls it, the centrifugal energy of the universe in a cosmic sense. He is fire, light, life, struggle, effort, thought, consciousness, progress, civilization, liberty, independence. The spirit. At the same time, he is pain, which is the reaction of the pleasure of action, and death, which is the revolution of life. Satan, burning in his own hell, produced by the fury of his own momentum, the expansive disintegration of the nebulae which is to concentrate into new worlds. And fitly is he again and again baffled by the eternal inertia of the passive energy of the cosmos, the inexorable I am, the flint from which the sparks are beaten out. Fitly is he and his adherents consigned to the sea of fire, because it is the sun, in one sense only, in the cosmic allegory, the fount of life in our system, where they are purified, disintegrated, and churned up to rearrange them for another life, the resurrection. That sun which, as the origin of the active principle of our earth, is at once the home and the source of the mundane Satan. To demonstrate, furthermore, the accuracy of Baissac's general theory, in Les Diables et Satan, cold is known to have a centripetal effect. Under the influence of cold, everything contracts. Under it, life hibernates or dies out, thought congeals, and fire is extinguished. Satan is immortal in his own fire. See, it is only in the Niflheim, the cold hell of the Scandinavian Eddas, of the I Am, that he cannot exist. But for all that, there is a kind of immortal existence in the Niflheim, and that existence must be painless and peaceful, because it is unconscious and inactive. In the kingdom of Jehovah, if this God were all that the Jews and Christians claim for him, there is no misery, no war, no marrying and giving in marriage, no change, no individual consciousness. Footnote. The author talks of the act of fighting, damning Jehovah, as though he were a synonym of Parabrahm. We have quoted from this article to show where it descends from the Theosophic teachings. Otherwise, it would be quoted someday against us, as everything published in the Theosophist generally is. I am going to point out here that not necessarily, right? Jehovah being a name for the Creator, not necessarily an accurate one, but a name of. As discussed before, everything in the Holy Spirit is God, but the Holy Spirit is that in motion, whereas God, the source, is that without the motion, and so peaceful, quiet. Not necessarily Parabrahm, even though Parabrahm is probably a different expression of the concept that I am relaying, right? Everything in stasis is God just as much as everything in motion is God. But everything in motion is the logos, the other quality of God, so to speak. Back to the text. All is absorbed in the spirit of the most powerful. It is emphatically a kingdom of peace and loyal submission, as that of the arch-rebel is one of war and revolution. It, the former, is in fact what the Theosophy calls nirvana, But then, Theosophy teaches that separation from the primal source, having once occurred, reunion can only be achieved by will, effort, which is directly satanic in the sense of this essay. And this is another thing in which I differ, right? I believe that we return to source when we die. I believe that the soul, the part that makes the decisions, is indeed eternal. I believe that it existed prior to being here, and that it will exist when it leaves here. I believe that we came from God, the stasis, into the logos, the motion, and we will return at once to the source when we die. So, to me, this isn't satanic, right? This is not only achieved by will. Whether or not you are on the one true path makes no difference whether you go back to source. It makes the difference here. It makes the difference in your life, whether you are seeking the source or not. Right? If you are doing this, if you are this far along, you are seeking the source. You are putting in the will and the effort, but that is not for the promise of an eternal life on the other side. Right? That is so that you can have the life you were intended to here. That is again, very significant differentiation from what I believe and what she believes. Back to the text. It is satanic from the standpoint of Orthodox Romanism, for it is owing to the prototype of that which became in time the Christian devil, to the radiant archangels, Dayan Kohans, who refused to create because they wanted man to become his own creator and an immortal God, that men can reach nirvana and the haven of the heavenly divine peace. To close this rather lengthy comment, the secret doctrine teaches that the fire devas, the Rudras and the Kumaras, the virgin angels, to whom Michael and Gabriel, the archangels, both belong, the divine rebels, called by the all-materializing and positive Jews, the Nahash, or deprived, preferred the curse of incarnation and the long cycles of terrestrial existence and rebirth to seeing the misery, even if unconscious, of the beings evolved as shadows out of their brethren, through the semi-passive energy of their two spiritual creators. This, again, is directly contradicting itself in the text, right? These unconscious could see. Okay. And so they preferred the curse of incarnation and the long cycles of terrestrial existence and rebirth to seeing the misery, even if unconscious, of the beings evolved as shadows out of their brethren through the semi-passive energy of their two spiritual creators. You're fucking kidding me. Like, if they are actually in nirvana, right, which is what is being intimated here, they were unconscious, therefore part of nirvana, but they could still somehow see this thing going on, even though nirvana is quite literally just described as nothing. Okay, whatever. That is the least of the problems that we've gone through so far. If man's uses of life should be such as neither to animalize nor to spiritualize, but to humanize self. Footnote. Explaining the Kabbalah, Dr. H. Pratt says, Spirit was to man, to the Jewish rabbin, rather, a bodiless, disembodied, and deprived and degraded being, and hence was termed by the ideograph, Nahash, deprived, represented as appearing to and seducing the human race, men, through the woman. In the picture from this Nahash, the spirit was represented by a serpent, because, from its destitution of bodily members, the serpent was looked upon as a deprived and depraved and degraded creature. New Aspects, page 235. Symbol for symbol, there are those who would prefer that the serpent, the symbol of wisdom and eternity, deprived of limbs as it is, to the Yod, the poetical ideograph of Jehovah in the Kabbalah, the god of the male symbol of generation. But to humanize self, before he can do so, he must be born human, not angelic. Hence, tradition shows the celestial yogis offering themselves as voluntary victims in order to redeem humanity, created godlike and perfect at first, and to endow him with human affections and aspirations, to evolve down. To do this, they had to give up their natural status and, descending on our globe, take up their abode in it for the whole cycle of the Mahayuga, thus exchanging their impersonal individualities for individual personalities, the bliss of sidereal existence for the curse of terrestrial life. Why would they do it if it was a curse? This voluntary sacrifice of the fiery angels, whose nature was knowledge and love, was construed by the exoteric theologies into a statement that shows the rebel angels hurled down from heaven and into the darkness of hell, the ever-burning darkness of hell, our earth, not. Hindu philosophy hints at the truth by teaching that the asuras hurled down by Siva are only in an intermediate state in which they prepare for higher degrees of purification and redemption from their wretched condition. But Christian theology, claiming to be based on the rock of divine love, charity, and justice of him it appeals to as its savior, has invented, to enforce that claim paradoxically, the dreary dogma of hell, that Archimedean lever of the Roman Catholic philosophy. And that again refers back to what I talked about earlier, hell being a completely Christian creation. As to rabbinical wisdom, than which there is none more positive, materialistic, or grossly terrestrial, as it brings everything down to physiological mysteries, it calls these beings the evil one, and the Kabbalists, Nahash, deprived, as just said, and the souls that have thrown themselves, after having been alienated in heaven from the Holy One, into an abyss at the dawn of their very existence, and have anticipated the time when they are to descend on earth. And let me explain at once that our quarrel is not with the Zohar and the Kabbalah in their right interpretation, for the latter is ours, but only with the gross pseudo-esoteric explanations of the later, and especially those of the Christian Kabbalists. Our earth and man, says the commentary, being the products of the three fires, whose three names answer in Sanskrit too, the electric fire, the solar fire, and the fire produced by friction. In other words, the Holy Spirit. These three fires, explained on the cosmic and human planes, are spirit, soul, and body. No. No, it is not. It is not. It is not. Electric fire, solar fire, and fire produced by friction are the exact same things, manifesting in a different way, right? In the exact same way that this lighter is manifesting in green, if I had one that was black, it would be a lighter still, right? This fire is exactly the same. The electric fire, the solar fire, and the fire produced by friction are all the exact same thing. They are change from one state of matter into another state of matter. What you see is the exothermic reaction of that change. Again, extremely important. And so that is not differentiated into spirit, soul, and body at all. If you believe that, you are incorrect. The three great root groups, with their four, and I absolutely believe in this division. I just do not believe in this explanation of the division, with their four additional divisions. These vary with the schools and become, according to their applications, the upadhis and the vehicles, or the noumena of these. In the exoteric accounts, they are personified by three sons of surpassing brilliancy and splendor, of Agni Abhamanin, the eldest son of Brahma, the cosmic Logos, by Swaha, one of Daksha's daughters. Footnote. Daksha, the intelligent, the competent. This name generally carries with it the idea of creative power. He is a son of Brahma and of Aditi, and, agreeably to other versions, a self-born power, which, like Minerva, sprang from his father's body. He is the chief of the Prajapati, the lords or creators of being. In Vishnu Purana, Parasat says of him, in every kalpa, or manvantara, Daksha and the rest are born and are again destroyed. And the Rig Veda says that Daksha sprang from Aditi, and Aditi from Daksha, a reference to the eternal cycle of rebirth of the same divine essence. This actually works if you do not anthropomorphize it, right? If you do not say that it created a being and that being was Logos, then it does work, right? From the God came the motion, and that motion is Logos. Now, if you want to call that motion Daksha, you're wrong, because it is not the intelligent part, right? The Holy Spirit is not the intelligence. The intelligence is the part that makes the decision. The part that carries out the decision is the Holy Spirit. The Daksha would be the soul. It cannot be the spirit. Those are separate things. Back to the text. In the metaphysical sense, the fire of friction means the union between Buddhi, the sixth, and Manas, the fifth principles, which thus are united or cemented together. The fifth, merging partially into and becoming part of the monad. In the physical, it relates to the creative spark, or germ, which fructifies and generates the human beings. The three fires, it is said, whose name are Pavaka, Pavamana, and Suchi, were condemned by a curse of Vasishtha, the great sage, to be born over and over again. This is clear enough. Therefore, the flames, whose functions are confused in the esoteric books, and who are called indifferently Prajapati, Pitras, Manus, Asuras, Rishis, Kumaras. Footnote. No one of these orders is distinct from the Pitras or progenitors, as says Manu. The wise call our fathers Vasas, our paternal grandfathers Rudras, our paternal great-grandfathers Adityas, agreeably to a text of the Vedas, or this is an everlasting Vedic text, is another translation. Kumaras, etc., are said to incarnate personally in the third root race and thus find themselves reborn over and over again. In the esoteric doctrine, they are generally named the Asuras, or the Asura Devata, or Patar Devata, gods. For, as said, they were first gods, and the highest before they became no gods, and had from spirits of heaven fallen into spirits of the earth. Footnote 2. As now discovered by the late G. Smith in the Babylonian cylinder literature, it was the same in Chaldean theogony. Ishtar, the eldest of heaven and earth, also Easter, which we are coming upon, that is the same word. Below him the Igaga, or angels of heaven, and the Anunnaki, or angels of earth. Below these again, various classes of spirit and genii called Sadhu, Vaduku, Ikimu, Galu, of which some were good, some evil. See the theory of spiritual evolution. Spirits of the earth, exoterically, note well in Orthodox dogma. No theologian, any more than an Orientalist, can ever understand the genealogies of the Prajapati, the Manus, and the Rishis, nor the direct connection of these, or their correlation with the gods, unless he has the key to the old primitive cosmogony and theogony, which all the nations originally had in common. All these gods and demigods are found reborn on earth in various kalpas and in as various characters, each, moreover, having his karma distinctly traced and every effect assigned to its cause. Before other stanzas could be explained, it was, as seen, absolutely necessary to show that the sons of dark wisdom, though identical with the archangels which theology has chosen to call the fallen, are as divine and as pure, and more so, than all the Michaels and Gabriels so glorified in the churches. The old book goes into various details of astral life, which at this juncture would be quite incomprehensible to the reader. It may, therefore, be left for later explanations, and the first and second races can now only receive bare notice. Not so for the third race, the root race which separated into sexes, and which was the first to be endowed with reason, men evolving pari passu with the globe, and the latter having incrustated more than 100 millions of years before. The first human subrace had already begun to materialize or solidify, so to say. But, as the stanza has it, the inner man, the conscious entity, was not. This conscious entity, occultism says, comes from, nay, in many cases is, the very entire essence and esse of the high intelligences condemned by the undeviating law of karmic evolution to reincarnate in this Manvantara. B. This verse, 39th, relates exclusively to the racial divisions. Strictly speaking, esoteric philosophy teaches a modified polygenesis. 4. While it assigns to humanity a oneness of origin, insofar that its forefathers or creators were all divine beings, though of different classes or degrees of perfection in their hierarchy, men were nevertheless born on 7 different centers of the continent of that period. Though all of one common origin, yet for reasons given, their potentialities and mental capabilities, outward or physical forms, and future characteristics were very different. Footnote. Some superior, others inferior, to suit the karma of the various reincarnating monads, which could not be all of the same degree of purity in their last births in other worlds. This accounts for the differences of races, the inferiority of the savage and other human varieties. And once again, we will point out that there are many beliefs that are no longer valid. This is one of them. The lack of opportunity does not intimate that there is a lack of capacity, right? Just because a race was born in rural wherever does not mean that they cannot learn. That is an intrinsic fallacy that is built into her belief system, right? There is no mental capacity difference. There is a learning difference, right? Your understanding of science and my understanding of science can be two completely different things. You can, like even today, we have people who live in rural Appalachia who share my melanin levels, right? Would you say that they are a less superior race because they have less opportunity for growth than I do? That is stupid. Like, just stupid. Just because you don't have an understanding does not mean that you cannot have an understanding. That is quite apparent, as we discussed in the other one, with the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. Every single one of them has the capacity to be a physicist. Now, whether they have the dedication, and every single one is a big extrapolation, right? Not everybody is endowed with the same mental capacities, right? There is a wide variation, even within same melanin levels. So, theoretically, they all have the same capacity for achievement. Any one of them can become the next physicist. Simply put,
All they lack is the opportunity to learn the things which are required. That is a surmountable problem, not an insurmountable one. And in order for it to be inferior on a genetic level, it would have to be insurmountable. You would not be able to teach somebody who did not have the capacity to learn. This, again, is one of those things that really pisses me off. So, back to the text. As to their complexions, there is a suggestive allegory told in Linga Purana. The Kumdra, the Rudra gods, so-called, see further, are described as incarnations of Siva, the destroyer of outward forms, named also Vamadeva. The latter as a Kumara, the eternal celibate, the chaste virgin youth, springs from Brahma in each great Manvantara, and again becomes four, a reference to the four great divisions of the human races, as regards complexion and type, and three chief variations of these. Thus, in the 29th Kalpa, in this case a reference to the transformation and evolution of the human form, which Siva ever destroys and remodels periodically, down to the Manvantaric great turning point about the middle of the fourth Atlantean race. In the 29th Kalpa, Siva, as Svetlohita, the root Kamara, becomes, from moon-colored, white. In his next transformation, he is red, and in this the exoteric version differs from the esoteric teaching. In the third, yellow. In the fourth, black. Esotericism now classes these 7 variations with their 4 great divisions into only 3 distinct primeval races, as it does not take into consideration the first race, which had neither type nor color, and hardly an objective, though colossal, form. The evolution of these races, their formation and development, went pari passu and on parallel lines with the evolution, formation, and development of 3 geological strata, from which the human complexion was as much derived as it was determined by the climates of these zones. It names the 3 great divisions, namely red-yellow, the black, and the brown-white. Footnote 2. There are, says Topinard, English edition of Anthropology with preface by Professor Broca, 3 fundamental elements of color in the human organism, namely the red, the yellow, and the black, which, mixed in variable quantities with the white of the tissues, give rise to those numerous shades seen in the human family. Hence, is science unintentionally supporting occultism again? Wrong. How do you know? What do you think? Did you know there is something that makes the difference? There is. It's called melanin. It is a enzyme, I believe, which affects skin tone. And I'm going to get real close to this. You see here? You see all of these little spots on my nose? We call those freckles. Every one of those is a differentiation in melanin levels from my base, which is a little bit lighter. That is the fundamental difference. It is entirely due to climatic problems, right? The people who had to deal with higher heat have darker skin. That is simply how it works. You are, again, fundamentally wrong in your assumption. Like, back when I was working full-time in construction, you would not be able to tell me at a distance different from anybody that came from Mexico or Honduras or Venezuela. I look complexionally exactly like them when I have been working in the sun for an extended amount of time. Exactly like them. Back to the text. The Aryan races, for instance, now varying from dark brown, almost black, red, brown, yellow, down to the whitest creamy color, are yet all of one and the same stock, the 5th root race, and spring from one single progenitor, called in Hindu exotericism by the generic name of Vyavasabhata Manu. The latter, remember, being that generic personage, the sage, who is said to have lived over 18 million years ago, and also 850,000 years ago, at the time of the sinking of the last remnants of the great continent of Atlantis. And again, I will refer you to Timaeus, which is the only account of Atlantis, and puts the sinking of the last remnant of that great continent right at 12,000 years ago, and not nearly at 850. See the root and seed Manus further on, and who is said to live even now in his mankind. The day at the end of this stanza, the primeval Manus of humanity. The light yellow is the color of the first solid human race, which appeared after the middle of the third root race, after its fall into generation, as just explained, bringing on the final changes. For it is only at that period that the last transformation took place, which brought forth man as he is now, only on a magnified scale. This race gave birth to the fourth race, Siva, gradually transforming that portion of humanity which became black with sin into red-yellow. The Red Indians and the Mongolians being the descendants of these, and finally into the brown-white races, which now, together with the yellow races, form the great bulk of humanity. The allegory in Lingua Purana is curious, as showing the great ethnological knowledge of the ancients. Now, this brown-white is my melanin levels, and I want to let you know, just so there is no confusion whatsoever, that is not the great bulk of humanity. When reading of the last transformation, let the reader consider at this juncture, if that took place 18 million years ago, how many millions more must it have required to reach that final stage? And if man, in his gradual consolidation, developed pari passu with the earth, how many millions of years must have elapsed during the first, second, and the first half of the third race? For the earth was in a comparatively ethereal condition before it reached its last consolidated state. The archaic teachings, moreover, telling us that, during the middle period of the Lemurio-Atlantean race, somebody's going to be upset. 3.5 races after the genesis of man, the earth, man, and everything on the globe was of a still grosser and more material nature, while such things as corals and some shells were still in a semi-gelatinous astral state. The cycles that intervened since then have already carried us onward, on the opposite ascending arc, some steps towards our dematerialization, as the spiritualist would say. The earth, ourselves, and all things have softened since then, aye, even our brains. But it has been objected by some theosophists that an ethereal earth, even some 15 or 20 million years ago, does not square with geology, which teaches us that winds blew, rains fell, waves broke on the shore, sands shifted and accumulated, etc., etc. That, in short, all natural causes now in operation were then in force. In the very earliest stages of geological time, aye, that of the oldest Paleozoic rocks. To this, the following answers are given. Firstly, what is the date assigned by geology to those oldest Paleozoic rocks? And secondly, why could not the winds blow, rain fall, and waves, of carbonic acid apparently, as science seems to imply, break on the shore in an earth semi-astral, in example, viscid? The word astral does not necessarily mean as thin as smoke in occult phraseology, but rather starry, shining, or pellucid, in various and numerous degrees, from a quite filmy to a viscid state, as just observed. But it is further objected, how could an astral Earth have affected the other planets in this system? Would not the whole process get out of gear now if the attraction of one planet was suddenly removed? The objection is evidently invalid, since our system is composed of older and younger planets. Some dead, like the moon, others in the process of formation. She did not know what the moon was, for all astronomy knows the contrary. Nor has the letter ever affirmed, so far as we know, that all the bodies in our system have sprung into existence and developed simultaneously. The cis-Himalayan secret teachings differ from those of India in this respect. Hindu occultism teaches that the Vayavasvata Manu humanity is 18 million and odd years old. We say yes, but only so far as physical or approximately physical man is concerned, who dates from the close of the third root race. Beyond that period, man, or his filmy image, may have existed for 300 million years. For all we know, since we are not taught figures which are and will remain secret with the masters of occult science, as justly stated in esoteric Buddhism. Moreover, whereas the Hindu Puranas speak of one Vayavasvata Manu, we affirm that there were several, the name being a generic one. We must now say a few more words on the physical evolution of man, but that will be tomorrow's video. This is going to bring us to the end of the history of the fourth race. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. All of the things that I extrapolated upon, I do feel like are worthy of it. I feel like that I have given a decent explanation with options for more explanation. This is already well over 2 hours, right? So there's only so much extrapolation I can do in each particular part. We talk about them as they come up. I point you to places where I talk about them in greater detail, because if I didn't, these would all be 6-hour videos, and it's already pushing the limits of watchability being 2.5 hours. So if you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I said. Put it in the box down below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. You probably won't get a good answer if you disagree, if you do not give reasoning. Just so we're clear. If you have another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the box down below as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks with a membership, or check out my book, which probably holds the answers you're actually looking for here anyway. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.